Rachel, empty your purse. Now. Charles Whitmore's voice sliced through the silence of the Whitmore estate like a hunting knife through raw hide. It was midnight in the heart of Buckhead, Atlanta's most exclusive zip code, and the only sounds in the 8,000-square-foot mansion were the steady ticking of a grandfather clock and the hum of the Sub-Zero fridge. Rachel Morgan stood still in the middle of the marble-floored kitchen, her back turned, hands gently drying on a linen towel. Slowly, deliberately, she turned around. Her eyes locked onto his. There was no panic. No trembling hands. No shaky voice. Only that unsettling calm. The kind of calm that makes the rich feel nervous in their own homes. "Is there a reason you're yelling at me in the middle of the night, Mr. Whitmore?" she asked, her voice cool, controlled, carrying that soft southern tone that always made her sound polite, even when she wasn't. Charles didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped forward. His 6'2" frame loomed like a verdict. His Rolex glinted under the kitchen pendant lights. "My wife's diamond watch is missing," he said. "You were the last one upstairs today." Rachel raised a brow, folding the towel neatly over the sink. "So you think I stole it?" "You tell me," he shot back. Silence. Then came the sound no one expected. Slap. The noise cracked through the room like thunder. But it wasn't Charles hitting Rachel. It was Rachel slapping down her iPhone on the granite counter. Screen up, recording app open. "I suggest we call the police," she said, her eyes never leaving his. "Because this is going to get very interesting. Very fast." Charles froze. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. Maid gets accused. Maid cries. Maid disappears. That was the story he was used to. But this wasn't that story. Rachel leaned in just slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You know what the funny thing is, Charles?" She tapped the phone once. The screen lit up with a folder labeled Evidence. "I've been waiting for this moment for 10 months. And right then, the doorbell rang. Once. Twice. 3 times. Charles blinked. "Who the hell is at my door at midnight?" Rachel smiled. And it wasn't the smile of a servant. It was the smile of a woman who just pulled the pin on a grenade and handed it to the man who never saw it coming. This isn't the story of a maid being framed. This is the story of a man who underestimated the wrong woman. Backhand index pointing right, stick around. What happens next will blow your mind. It started quietly. Like most things that matter. 10 months ago, Rachel Morgan walked into the Whitmore estate for the first time. She wore a crisp navy blouse, faded jeans, and a smile that said, "I know how to survive." She carried a small black backpack and the kind of resume that most people in her position never bothered to write. Charles Whitmore didn't even read it. He just glanced at her, saw the color of her skin, heard the tone of her voice, and decided she was obedient enough. He offered her the job before she had even finished her second sentence. The mansion stood like a fortress on a hill in Buckhead, 15,000 square feet of marble, mahogany, and inherited arrogance. Every room looked like it had been pulled from an architectural magazine. But Rachel wasn't impressed by money. She had been raised around it, investigated it, watched it rot people from the inside out. What caught her attention were the rules that weren't spoken out loud. The gardeners, all Mexican, entered through the side gate. The delivery drivers, mostly black or brown, were met at the garage, never the front door. The maids, when they spoke, were expected to speak softly, and never about anything that wasn't about laundry, dishes, or dust. Rachel said yes to the job that afternoon, and the moment she did, the investigation began. She had once been a rising star in Atlanta journalism. Award-winning, sharp, fearless. She'd spent a decade uncovering corruption in local government until the wrong mayor's office pulled the wrong strings and her contract with the Atlanta Observer vanished overnight. No severance. No apology. No backup plan. Bills piled up. Her savings dried out. She sold her car. Then her apartment. When she finally moved into a shared duplex on the edge of Decatur, something inside her snapped, but not in defeat. In resolve. She wasn't going to run from the system anymore. She was going to enter it quietly, and then take it down from the inside. Charles Whitmore became her target not because he was the worst man in Georgia, but because he was typical. Polished on the outside, rotten underneath. She'd heard rumors about women who'd worked in his house before. Maids who had been fired after misunderstandings involving missing jewelry or cash. Always women of color. Always dismissed quietly. No police reports. No due process. Just shame and silence. So Rachel watched. Listened. She scrubbed floors with her ears open. She folded laundry while memorizing names from whispered phone calls. She mopped around oak-paneled doors where deals were made and lives were ruined. And she recorded everything. Hidden in plain sight. It wasn't glamorous. There were mornings she wanted to scream, especially when Cynthia Whitmore tossed her Gucci scarves onto the floor like confetti or asked her to speak slower, like she couldn't understand English. But Rachel smiled. She played her part. Because every day, she was one step closer. One step closer to exposing them all. No one suspected a thing. And that's exactly how she wanted it. You don't bring down a kingdom by screaming at its gates. You do it by learning the layout, brick by brick, from the inside. Backhand index pointing right, and Rachel Morgan had just found the master key. The first real sign came on a Thursday morning in late February. It was raining outside, that cold, sticky Atlanta kind of rain that makes the city feel like it's wrapped in plastic. Rachel was polishing the kitchen island when she heard it. Charles on the phone, pacing in his home office, voice lower than usual. She couldn't make out the whole conversation, but she caught fragments. Just bury it in zoning paperwork. Those inspectors? Already taken care of. Just make sure that foundation report doesn't reach the council. She slowed her movements, letting the rag glide across the marble while her ears leaned in. The call ended in under 2 minutes. But the tone? It reeked of backroom deals and prepaid silence. That was the first clue. Not a smoking gun, but the first fingerprint on the weapon. A few days later, Rachel was dusting the study and noticed something strange. A folder on Charles's desk, labeled Contractor Variance, District 9, had been carelessly left open. Inside were photos, construction sites, cracked sidewalks, leaning support beams. A note was scribbled in the corner, Fast Track Approval. No press. That same evening, Rachel slipped her phone out and took 15 quick snapshots while pretending to clean the baseboards. The deeper she dug, the clearer the pattern became. Charles Whitmore wasn't just a successful developer. He was a man with a very particular method. Cut corners. Grease hands. Build fast. Sell faster. When something went wrong, someone lower on the ladder took the fall. And when it came to the people he hired for his home, they weren't employees. They were chess pieces. Rachel started paying closer attention to the staff rotation. She noticed that gardeners never lasted more than 6 months. Delivery people were rotated by the service company every few weeks. Even the cleaning supply vendor had changed 3 times in the last year. Anyone who got too comfortable? Gone. That's when she met Luis Delgado. Luis was the exception. A soft-spoken man in his 40s, Luis had been the Whitmore gardener for over a year, an eternity compared to the rest. He worked 6 days a week, rain or shine, never spoke unless spoken to, and kept to himself. But Rachel noticed something. Luis had eyes that noticed everything. Like her, he watched in silence. One afternoon, while refilling a planter box, Rachel whispered, "How do you survive here this long?" Luis didn't look up. He just replied, "I stay invisible. But I see everything." From that moment on, a silent partnership formed. Luis began leaving Rachel small signals. A note tucked into a bag of mulch. Check the basement door Tuesday. A photo slipped into her cleaning cart. Security system blind spot here. Every breadcrumb brought her closer. Rachel started mapping out the house's layout, the patterns in Charles's meetings, the safe codes he punched in when he thought no one was watching. She logged everything. Times, names, behavior. By month 3, she had a digital archive that could make a DA raise both eyebrows. But the real breakthrough, it wasn't about what Charles did in public. It was what he said when he thought no one was listening. And Rachel, she was always listening. The most dangerous person in the room isn't the one shouting orders. It's the one quietly writing everything down. Backhand index pointing right Rachel Morgan wasn't just cleaning floors. She was building a case. By the time spring rolled into Atlanta, Rachel had already collected over 100 hours of audio, a full folder of suspicious contractor files, and a detailed schedule of every closed-door meeting Charles Whitmore held inside his estate. But the next phase of her investigation wasn't about documents or recordings. It was about people, the ones who had come before her. She started quietly, reaching out to housekeeping agencies across the city under a fake name. She pretended to be an employer looking to replace her unreliable maid, and asked questions most agencies weren't used to. Do you have anyone who worked at the Whitmore residence before? Anyone with experience in high-end homes around Buckhead? Most responses were generic, but after a few days, Rachel got a hit. A woman named Belinda Jones, 59, had been with the Whitmores for nearly 2 years. Until one day, without warning, she was fired. The reason? Cynthia Whitmore claimed a pair of diamond earrings had gone missing from her bathroom vanity. Rachel managed to track Belinda down at her modest home in South Fulton. The front porch was small, but the flower beds were meticulously kept. Rachel knocked gently. The door opened a crack, and an older woman with sharp, weary eyes peered through. "I'm not here to sell anything," Rachel said softly. I think you were wrongfully accused, and I believe you're not the only one." That's all it took. Belinda stepped aside, motioned her in, and sat down without saying a word for nearly a full minute. Then she spoke. "I should have sued them," she said finally, "but I didn't have the money, or the fight left in me." She poured 2 glasses of sweet tea and told Rachel everything. How she had worked double shifts without complaint. How Cynthia would test her by leaving valuables out in the open. How Charles once told her, half-jokingly, "If something ever goes missing, Belinda, I'll know who to blame." How the morning after the earrings vanished, the police weren't called, just a private security guard and a termination letter. Rachel listened in silence, taking notes, but also watching Belinda's face. How her jaw tightened at certain memories. How her eyes filled with anger that never really found a place to go. "You know what hurt the most?" Belinda asked. "It wasn't the accusation. It was how quickly they threw me away. Like I never existed. No apology. No second chance. Just gone." Rachel promised her that she would not be forgotten. Over the next few weeks, Rachel tracked down 3 more women. All black. All fired under almost identical circumstances. Something small went missing. No formal investigation. No follow-up. Just silence. One woman, Danielle, was barely 20 when she got fired. She'd been saving to go to nursing school. After the accusation, no other homes would hire her. She ended up cleaning motel rooms for $9 an hour. Each story Rachel heard felt like another brick in a dam ready to burst. The Whitmores had created a pattern, weaponizing suspicion, protecting their image, discarding lives like stained dish towels. And no one had ever called them out. Until now. Rachel wasn't just investigating a man anymore. She was giving voice to women who had been erased. Some stories get buried because people in power want them forgotten. But all it takes is one person who refuses to let them stay hidden. Backhand index pointing right. Rachel had found the pattern. Now she was about to reveal the system. It wasn't just about stolen jewelry anymore. The deeper Rachel dug, the more it became clear. Charles Whitmore wasn't just a corrupt man abusing domestic staff. He was the anchor of something much uglier. A quiet, calculated web of influence that stretched far beyond the gated driveway of his mansion. It started with a permit. Rachel overheard it one afternoon while cleaning the upstairs hallway. Charles was on speakerphone in his study, pacing as he always did during calls that mattered. His voice was lower than usual. Clipped. "Listen," he said. "Just slide the inspection approval through. It's a minor setback. And between you and me, that foundation report? Trash it. I'll make it worth your time." Click. Rachel stood outside the door, frozen. It wasn't the first time she'd heard something like that. But this time, she had a voice memo recording live in her apron pocket. She labeled it, Foundation Cover-Up Number 2. Later that night, after the Whitmores had left for a charity gala downtown, Rachel let herself into Charles's study using the duplicate keys she had taken a mold of weeks ago. She didn't need to snoop far. The man was arrogant enough to leave everything in his unlocked file drawer. That's when she found it. A folder labeled, City Ties. Inside, a spreadsheet with names, phone numbers, and handwritten dollar amounts next to each. City councilmen, inspectors, planning committee staff, even a local news anchor from Channel 5. Rachel's stomach dropped. This wasn't a list of colleagues. It was a ledger. A hit list of influence. It explained why Whitmore's developments always got fast-tracked, why code violations disappeared, and why, despite whispers of scandal, his reputation in Atlanta's business elite remained stainless. She snapped pictures of every single page, then carefully closed the folder and reset the room exactly as she had found it. Not a coaster out of place. Not a drawer out of line. But the next day, something happened that rattled even her. She walked into the kitchen and found Cynthia whispering into her phone. "I told him to stop pushing so hard," Cynthia said. "If this comes back on us, I swear I'm done covering for him." Then she turned and saw Rachel standing there. The air stiffened. Cynthia's mask snapped back into place. "Oh, Rachel," she smiled thinly. "Can you make sure the wine fridge gets cleaned this week?" Rachel nodded. "Of course, ma'am." But in that moment, something shifted. Cynthia wasn't just a trophy wife anymore. She was a silent partner. And maybe, just maybe, she was closer to cracking than she let on. Later that week, Charles hosted a private dinner with 2 city officials. Rachel wasn't allowed in the dining room, but she passed by often enough to hear the laughter, the words zoning immunity, and a joke that ended with, "If things go south, I've got a scapegoat in uniform." They all laughed. Rachel didn't. She stood in the hallway, holding a tray of untouched hors d'oeuvres, heart pounding, not from fear, but from clarity. These men weren't untouchable. They were traceable. Every deal, every favor, every disgusting joke. And Rachel was tracing all of it. Power doesn't corrupt in secret. It corrupts in confidence, because it never expects to be watched. Backhand index pointing right, but this time, someone was watching, and she had the receipts. It happened on a Wednesday. Midweek, mid-afternoon, mid-sentence. Because that's how setups usually go. Not with fireworks, but with a whisper. With something just subtle enough to feel believable. Just loud enough to stain a name. Rachel had just finished reorganizing the linen closet when she heard it. Cynthia's voice rang out from upstairs. Sharp, shrill, and perfectly theatrical. "Charles, my watch. It's gone. My diamond Rolex is gone." Rachel didn't move right away. She'd expected this moment. Prepared for it. Still, her pulse quickened. Her fingers tightened slightly around the towel she was folding. She let out a slow breath and walked, calmly, toward the grand staircase. Charles was already storming down, tie loosened, anger flashing across his face like lightning before a storm. "Rachel! Kitchen! Now!" He barked it like a command, not a request. Rachel followed him into the kitchen, her footsteps silent on the oak floors. Cynthia came trailing behind like a woman wronged, clutching her bare wrist like it had been amputated. "I took it off last night after the benefit," she said, eyes darting wildly, but never meeting Rachel's. "Left it on my dresser. It was there this morning. Now it's gone." Rachel looked at both of them. Steady." Charles stepped closer. "You were upstairs today." "I was," Rachel said gently. "I changed the bedding and wiped down the nightstands. As I do every Wednesday." His tone dropped into something colder. "Empty your purse." Rachel tilted her head, just slightly. "Excuse me." "You heard me," he said, voice firm. "Empty your purse. Here. Now." Cynthia folded her arms, already certain of the outcome. It was written all over her face, the righteous certainty of the accuser. Rachel slowly set her black canvas tote onto the granite countertop. With unhurried movements, she opened it. One by one, she placed the contents out in full view. A set of keys, hand lotion, a phone charger, a pack of gum, 2 crumpled receipts from Kroger. Nothing else. No watch. No diamonds. No evidence. But Rachel wasn't done. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out her iPhone. "I think it's time we involve someone impartial," she said, unlocking the screen and pulling up the voice recorder. "Because I just so happen to have audio from when you claimed to take off the watch last night." You said you were too tired to make it to the bedroom, remember? You told Charles in the hallway. I left it on the coffee table in the sunroom. Cynthia's face went pale. Charles stiffened. Rachel continued, tapping another app open. A folder labeled Whitmore Surveillance, Phase 3. And if we'd like to be really thorough, she added, I also have footage from the front hallway. The same footage that shows no one, absolutely no one, entering or leaving your bedroom today except for you, Cynthia. Silence swallowed the room. Cynthia opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. Charles looked at Rachel like he was seeing her for the first time, not as the maid, but as something else. Something dangerous. And then came the sound that shattered whatever illusion of control they still had. Ding dong. The doorbell. Then again. And again. 3 times. Precisely. Rachel didn't flinch. She turned to Charles with the faintest smile. Right on time. A setup only works when your target doesn't know it's coming. But Rachel... She was 10 steps ahead, and waiting. Backhand index pointing right now the trap was set. And the truth was about to walk through the front door. The front door echoed open with a deep, weighted creak. Rachel didn't rush. She turned with calm precision, wiped her hands on her apron like this was just another Wednesday, and walked through the hallway toward the entry. Charles trailed behind her, unsettled, his mouth open but without words. Cynthia stood frozen in the kitchen, her fingers still clinging to the absence of her watch. As Rachel stepped into the foyer, 4 figures entered the house like a storm in slow motion. No uniforms. No apologies. Just quiet confidence. First came Belinda Jones, dressed in sharp navy slacks and a blazer that didn't come from a thrift store this time. She walked like someone who had learned never to lower her eyes again. Behind her was Danielle Rivers, the young woman whose nursing dreams had been buried under false accusations. She carried a thick folder. Her hands didn't shake. Then came Avery Monroe, civil rights attorney, friend to the unheard, and an absolute professional in cracking open power structures like peanuts at a barbecue. He gave Rachel a nod, not of greeting, but of confirmation. And finally, Luis Delgado, the gardener who was never really just a gardener. He stood tall, his eyes scanning Charles with a gaze that said, You remember me now, don't you? Charles blinked. What is this? Avery stepped forward. Mr. Whitmore, we're here to discuss a pattern. A pattern of racial discrimination, wrongful termination, and documented abuses of authority. This is my home, Charles said, his voice rising, cracking. You can't just barge in here like... Actually, Avery cut in, calm as a judge. You invited us the moment you accused this woman of theft without proof. The moment you made her your scapegoat. Rachel stepped aside and gestured to the living room. I figured you'd want to sit for this, she said. Charles didn't move. Belinda walked straight past him and sat on the edge of the Italian leather sofa she once vacuumed for a living. Danielle followed, flipping open the folder. Inside, signed statements, photographs, transcripts of text messages, and a timeline stretching back 5 years. Shall we start with the incident from July 2018? Avery offered. Where Belinda was terminated over earrings that were later found in Cynthia's gym bag? Cynthia stepped into view at that moment, face pale, lips parted, her carefully manicured hand gripping the staircase railing. She didn't speak. She didn't deny it. Rachel walked to the fireplace and reached behind a framed picture of the Whitmores on vacation in Aspen. With a soft clink, she revealed the missing Rolex. I found this behind your wedding photo, she said. Same place I saw you put it last night, Cynthia, when you thought I wasn't looking. The room fell into a silence so heavy, it practically echoed. I waited to return it, Rachel added, because I wanted to see how far you were willing to go. Charles reached for his phone. Avery smiled. By all means, call your lawyer. But you might want to know, your 3 favorite firms have already recused themselves. Conflict of interest. Louis spoke, finally. Just 1 sentence. You picked the wrong people to silence. And Rachel, she was no longer the maid. She was the reckoning. They thought she was disposable. But she was the architect of their downfall. Backhand index pointing right, stay with us. This story is only halfway over. The silence after Rachel placed the Rolex on the table wasn't just awkward, it was seismic. Cynthia stared at the glittering watch like it had personally betrayed her. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words followed. Her posture, usually perfect, slouched just an inch, like the air had been knocked out of her. Charles turned to her slowly. "You told me you left it on the dresser," he said through clenched teeth. Cynthia's eyes darted between the roomful of witnesses. Her perfectly constructed world, pearls, polished silver, and philanthropic brunches, was now held hostage by the very people she used to ignore. I forgot," she mumbled, voice thin as tissue paper. "I must have misplaced it." Belinda stood. "That's what you said about my earrings." Cynthia flinched. Danielle followed, flipping a page in the file on her lap. "And about my grandmother's gold locket. The one your daughter found under her bed 2 weeks later." Charles backed toward the kitchen, his face flushing, trying to reclaim control. "None of this proves anything. You don't have." Avery raised a hand calmly. "We have over a dozen testimonies, 23 recordings, digital timestamps, surveillance footage, and internal correspondence showing a consistent pattern of racial targeting, manipulation, and coercion. We also have evidence of misuse of public funds, bribes to city officials, and zoning fraud connected to over $11.4 million in taxpayer dollars." That number hit harder than any accusation. Charles stumbled back a step. Luis reached into his coat pocket and set a USB drive on the coffee table. "These are voice memos you made on your Bluetooth car system. Turns out the Gardners do know how to operate a recorder." The room shifted. The walls of the Whitmore house, once lined with paintings and silence, now felt claustrophobic, like truth itself was pressing against the glass windows, waiting to shatter everything. Then came the next blow. Rachel opened her phone, scrolling to a video thumbnail. "This was recorded 3 weeks ago," she said, tapping play. The screen filled with Charles's face, captured from an upstairs hallway security blind spot. His voice, clear, arrogant, filled the living room. "If another item goes missing, we'll blame the maid. She looks like someone people won't question." He laughed in the video. So did Cynthia. And in the present-day living room, neither one of them said a word. Avery leaned forward, speaking as if to a jury. "You built an empire not just on money, Mr. Whitmore, but on exploitation. You treated people like furniture, disposable, replaceable. And now, you're out of replacements." Charles's jaw tightened. "You're bluffing." Rachel stepped closer, her voice quiet, steady. "No, Charles. You're unraveling." Right then, Charles's phone buzzed. Once. Then again. Then again. He looked at the screen. 4 missed calls. 2 voicemails. One from his lawyer. Another from his publicist. Then the message popped up, mid-screen. Channel 5 just aired the story. Social media is on fire. Pull all appearances. Damage control ASAP. The mask, the one he'd worn for years in front of cameras, city officials, and gated neighbors, was slipping fast. And what lay beneath wasn't leadership. It was rot. When power wears a mask, it looks like dignity. But when the mask falls, you see it for what it really is. Fear dressed in arrogance. Backhand index pointing right, and now, Charles Whitmore had nothing left to hide behind. Charles Whitmore had always been the man who picked up the phone and got what he wanted. Permits approved. Zoning laws bent. City inspectors suddenly blind. But that day, standing in his own living room, surrounded by the very people he thought were beneath him, every call he made led straight to a dead end. Voicemail. Unavailable. "Sorry, Charles, but we have to distance ourselves from this situation." Within an hour, word had spread like wildfire. The video Rachel played was already trending on Twitter. A clip of Charles calling Rachel the perfect scapegoat had racked up over 2.4 million views and counting. Hashtags like #ScapeGoatNoMore and #WhitmoreExposed were everywhere. His publicist called in a panic. "We're hemorrhaging clients. Do not speak to the press. Do not post. Do not even breathe near a microphone." Charles didn't respond. He just sat there, in his grand living room, staring at the Rolex still glittering under the chandelier. No longer a symbol of wealth, but of failure. Cynthia had gone upstairs. Doors slammed. Locks clicked. No one had seen her since Rachel revealed the watch. And Charles, for the first time in his career, he had no idea what to do. Then came the next hit. Avery Monroe received a text and smiled. Channel 11 has confirmed that Whitmore Development is being removed from 3 major projects. City Hall is opening an ethics investigation. And, he glanced up at Charles, you're being subpoenaed next week. Charles turned pale. You don't understand, he muttered, his voice unraveling. I built half this city. No, Rachel replied calmly. You built a facade. And now it's collapsing, brick by brick. She wasn't gloating. There was no smugness in her voice. Just truth. The kind of truth that stings more than any insult. Charles looked around the room like a man trying to find solid ground in a sinking house. The art on the walls felt hollow now. The furniture, Italian leather, hand-stitched, looked like props in a bad play. His empire wasn't crumbling. It had already collapsed. He just hadn't noticed it yet. His phone vibrated again. This time, it was his secretary. Sir, the investors from the West Midtown project are pulling out. They saw the footage. Also, we just received a formal notice from the IRS. They want to audit the last 7 years. Charles didn't say a word. He slowly lowered himself into the nearest chair. Not because he was tired, but because his legs had given up trying to support a legacy that no longer existed. Across the room, Belinda stood with her hands folded, watching him. I lost everything because of you, she said softly. But somehow, this moment makes it hurt a little less. Luis added, you never thought any of us would speak. But we did. And we brought proof. Charles looked at Rachel. She met his gaze, unwavering. For 10 months, she said, you thought I was just folding towels and cleaning countertops. But I was documenting everything. Every lie. Every bribe. Every insult. He wanted to scream. But there was nothing left to say. The world he had carefully crafted, polished press releases, handshake deals, golf course alliances, had turned on him in less than a day. And it wasn't over. It was just beginning. When the walls finally cave in, the powerful don't fall from grace. They crash into reality. Backhand index pointing right, and Charles Whitmore had just hit the ground. 3 months had passed since that unforgettable afternoon inside the Whitmore estate. The headlines had calmed. The social media firestorms faded to embers. But the real change, the kind that doesn't scream, but whispers with purpose, was just beginning to bloom. Rachel Morgan now walked through the streets of downtown Atlanta not as a maid, not as a victim, but as a voice. She had been offered 3 jobs in journalism. She chose none of them. Instead, she opened her own non-profit newsroom, the Marigold Collective, named after the flowers she used to plant outside the Whitmore's guest house. The mission, to give investigative resources and legal support to workers who had been silenced, fired, or framed by those in power. Her small office on Peachtree Street buzzed with volunteers, interns, and former maids now training as data researchers and field interviewers. Rachel didn't just expose injustice. She was building a platform where justice could be pursued long after the cameras stopped rolling. Belinda Jones, who once folded laundry in silence, now ran a cleaning service of her own. But not just any service. Phoenix Housekeeping hired only women who had experienced discrimination or wrongful termination. She offered fair wages, flexible hours, and dignity. The waiting list to work there stretched 5 pages long. Danielle Rivers was back in nursing school, fully funded. Her story had reached a local scholarship foundation, and within weeks, she was awarded a full ride. She now volunteers at the same clinic where she once cleaned bathrooms, this time in scrubs, not gloves. And Luis Delgado, he was promoted by the City Parks Department after a regional director saw his name in the Whitmore coverage and read about his quiet bravery. He now oversees landscaping for Centennial Olympic Park, where his designs bloom across 21 acres of public beauty. He walks through them daily, knowing he once walked invisible in someone else's yard. Even Avery Monroe, the attorney who helped piece it all together, expanded his practice. He opened a new division focused exclusively on labor rights for domestic workers and blue-collar immigrants, people often overlooked, yet foundational to American life. Their lives weren't perfect now, but they were theirs. No longer lived in the shadows of someone else's mansion. no longer held hostage by fear or silence. One quiet Sunday, Rachel returned to South Fulton and visited Belinda. They sat on the porch, drinking sweet tea again, this time with their shoulders straighter and eyes brighter. "You remember what you told me the day I knocked on your door?" Rachel asked. Belinda nodded. "I said I didn't have the fight left in me." Rachel smiled. "Well, we fought anyway. And look where we are." Belinda didn't respond. She just raised her glass, touched it gently to Rachel's, and said, "To the invisible. May we never be unseen again." Across the city, the mansion on Ridgecrest Lane sat empty. Its windows dark, the lawn overgrown. A foreclosure notice had been posted near the front gate just last week. Some called it karma. Others called it justice. Rachel called it the cost of underestimation. When the unheard find their voice, and the unseen claim their space, something powerful happens. Not revenge, but rebirth. Backhand index pointing right, and Rachel Morgan had become the catalyst for a movement far bigger than herself. Every story, no matter how dramatic, holds something beneath the headlines, something we can carry into our own lives. For Rachel Morgan and those who stood beside her, what began as a battle for justice became something even deeper. A masterclass in survival, dignity, and reclaiming power without losing humanity. And for the rest of us watching from the outside, there are lessons worth keeping. Lesson 1. Never mistake silence for weakness. Charles Whitmore thought Rachel was quiet because she was afraid. But silence isn't always fear. It can be observation, patience, planning. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room isn't the loudest one. It's the one paying attention, the one recording receipts, the one waiting for the right moment, not out of revenge, but out of necessity. In your life, whether at work, in family dynamics, or in society, never assume the person with the least to say has the least to offer. And if you're the one staying silent, remember, still waters carve the deepest canyons. Lesson 2. Systems only change when someone challenges them from the inside. Rachel could have walked away, moved on, found another job, another city. But instead, she walked straight into the house of the man who symbolized everything broken about her world, and she infiltrated it with grace and precision. That takes courage most people don't talk about. The kind that shows up with a mop in one hand and a plan in the other. In our lives, we often avoid the very rooms that hold the most power over us. But real change, the kind that lasts, usually starts when someone chooses to go back into those rooms. Not to comply, but to challenge. Lesson 3. Dignity doesn't come from titles. Comes from truth. Charles had wealth, reputation, and access. Rachel had none of those. But she had something more powerful, truth, and the quiet, consistent willingness to stand in it, day after day, while everyone else underestimated her. Our society often equates value with visibility, followers, fame, financial status. But the real power lies in character, in integrity, in doing the right thing when no one's watching, and refusing to be shaken when they finally do. Lesson 4. Your story is a weapon, if you're willing to tell it. Belinda, Danielle, Luis. They had been holding their pain in for years. Not because they wanted to, but because no one ever asked. Until Rachel came along. And once they spoke up, everything began to shift. Everyone has a story. And someone out there needs to hear yours. Not because it's perfect, but because it's real. And real stories have the power to connect, to change hearts, to spark revolutions. Lesson 5. The ones who seem invisible often carry the biggest truths. Rachel wasn't seen because people like Charles didn't know how to look beyond the surface. But the irony? That invisibility gave her full access to everything. In a world obsessed with status, remember this. Those who clean the rooms often understand them better than those who decorate them. And sometimes, the person you dismiss is the only one who truly knows what's going on. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it wears an apron. Sometimes it walks in through the service entrance and leaves through the front door with the truth in hand. Backhand index pointing right, and maybe, just maybe, that's the kind of power we all carry, if we're willing to see it. The house on Ridgecrest Lane is quiet now. Its marble floors, once echoing with commands and footsteps of hired help, sit in stillness. The hedges are overgrown. The driveway empty. There's a for sale sign on the gate. Weather-worn, leaning slightly, like even it has lost faith in the future of that home. And inside one of the upstairs rooms, once a symbol of power and control, a few boxes remain. Files, dust-covered awards, a crystal plaque from a mayoral gala no one remembers anymore. Charles Whitmore doesn't live here now. He lives 3 zip codes away, in a rented townhouse, where no one greets him by name, and no golf club returns his calls. Meanwhile, just 15 blocks away, in a shared office above a downtown bookstore, Rachel Morgan starts her day with black coffee and a whiteboard full of tips, leads, and worker testimonies. She's not chasing fame. She's not after revenge. She's doing what she always wanted to do. Tell the stories that were never meant to be told. And she's no longer doing it alone. Every message in her inbox. Every phone call from someone scared to speak up. Every young woman who says, "Your story gave me the courage to tell mine," is proof of something powerful. That the smallest voice, when given a mic, can become thunder. So, what does this story really leave us with? Not just a villain brought low, or a system exposed. It leaves us with a mirror. A mirror we all have to look into. Because this isn't just about one house in Atlanta. This isn't just about a maid and her boss. This is about every room where power assumes it's alone. Every boardroom, every office, every household where silence is used as a shield for injustice. And every person who chooses to finally speak. If this story made you feel something, anger, hope, reflection, then don't let that feeling fade into the scroll of the next video. Let it grow. Let it challenge you. Ask yourself, green circle, who are the people I pass every day without seeing? Green circle, who do I underestimate, and why? Green circle, and if I had the chance to speak truth to power, would I? Because you do have that chance. Not everyone is meant to be an investigative journalist. But we all have a role in shaping the world we live in. Sometimes that role is listening. Sometimes it's amplifying. Sometimes it's simply refusing to look away. And maybe, just maybe, the next Rachel Morgan isn't on the news yet. Maybe she's wiping tables in a restaurant near you, or working the overnight shift at a hospital, or standing quietly at the back of the room, taking notes. And maybe she's you. So if this story moved you, share it. Not for clicks, not for likes, but because truth doesn't go viral unless we carry it forward. White heavy checkmark, subscribe for more real stories of unseen courage. White heavy checkmark, leave a comment if you've ever been underestimated and overcame. White heavy checkmark, and above all, stay awake, stay listening, stay human. The world doesn't change with noise. It changes when someone dares to act while no one's watching, and keeps acting when everyone finally is. Backhand index pointing right, this wasn't just a story. It was a warning. Backhand index pointing right, and maybe, just maybe, it was a beginning.